final requests made by the good senator for Kansas. I agree with everything he said. As he said, we have 4 appropriation bills bundled together here, proposed to be bundled together here: military construction and veterans, agriculture, ledge branch, and the Commerce, Justice, Science bill. And I have the privilege of working with Chairman Moran on what we call the CJS bill. And it makes very important targeted investments in a whole range of areas that he described. And of course, one of the areas of jurisdiction of this subcommittee is the Department of Justice and the FBI. And in my view, we absolutely have an obligation to make sure we address the needs and the mission of the men and women of the FBI, that we provide the resources to carry out that mission, and that we make sure that they're safe in conducting that mission. And I'm here on the floor objecting to this request today because just a short time ago, the Trump administration took $1.4 billion that this Congress had set aside on a bipartisan basis and proposed that instead of going to a site for a new headquarters that had met the security requirements and that had gone through a competition, the administration proposed to effectively rescind those funds and use them for a different purpose without presenting a plan as to how their alternative would meet the security requirements for the men and women of the FBI. I'm not going to repeat the whole history over many, many years that this Senate has gone through with respect to ensuring that the men and women of the FBI have a new headquarters that's fit for purpose and meets the security requirements. I will only point out that the FBI, in making the determination with respect to where they had planned to go before the Trump administration's intervention, said this, and I quote, "Because of the symbolic nature of the client mission and performance of functions critical to the security of the United States, a facility security level 5 designation was selected for this campus." In all the work that this Senate has done and all the work to date at the FBI, it has been determined that wherever the FBI makes its new home and new headquarters, it has to meet the level 5 security requirements because of the special mission of those men and women, and because I think all of us want to make sure that they are protected in the greatest degree that we can make sure their security is protected. So in the Appropriations Committee, I worked on an amendment that would have said that the FBI has to move its new headquarters to the place that had already won the competition and already been selected, and one of the reasons is it had met the level 5 security requirement. I'm not asking that in the amendment that I proposed for the floor today. I asked for something very straightforward. I proposed an amendment that simply says that wherever the FBI chooses to make its new headquarters, it has to meet the level 5 security requirements that it itself has laid out as necessary to defend the safety of the men and women who do that important work. That is an amendment that we should include in this bill. And that is why I'm here right now objecting to the proposal that's being put forward, because while we put an even stronger version of that amendment at one point in our bill in the Appropriations Committee, that action was then reversed. And so now I am proposing that we just put the other alternative forward, and again, based on the consistent position taken by the FBI, taken by members of the Senate, that level 5 security requirement. It's important, and wherever they go, they should be able to do a study. They should be able to conduct a study before they move people into a new headquarters, before they put people at risk, to show that that new place, wherever it may be, is fit for purpose and meets those security requirements. That is a simple request that I would have thought all of us could stand behind, making sure that the new headquarters of the men and women of the FBI meets the security requirements that we and they have set out. And so that is why I reserve the right to request, and I will now ask the senator to modify his request so that my amendment, number 3126, be included in the list of amendments in the manager's package to be adopted en bloc.
Will the senator from Kansas so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object. Madam President, let me explain what the senator from Maryland is asking be done. And I explained earlier that there's a set of amendments that is in this unanimous consent request that are put into a manager's package where they've been agreed by both the Republican and Democrat leaders of the Senate. In other words, there's been agreement that these amendments are satisfactory and will be adopted upon the adoption of that amendment. The senator from Maryland's amendment that he seeks is not in that list because it's in the other list I described. The list that requires a vote of the Senate to determine whether or not that amendment should be adopted, in this case by 51 votes of the Senate. So Senator Van Hollen's, the senator from Maryland's request is, can I move my amendment? Can we modify the unanimous consent request to move my amendment to the place that it's assured of being passed, rather than leave it in the place in which he offers that amendment during the debate of the bills, the underlying bills that we're talking about this evening, in this case, Commerce, Justice, Science, and allow the members of the United States Senate to agree or disagree by approving his amendment with 51 votes or not. So, Madam President, the change in procedure is, do I get my amendment approved by unanimous agreement, or do I have to earn the votes of 51 senators to have my amendment approved? And the reality is, there is not unanimous agreement that the amendment that the senator is speaking, the senator from Maryland is speaking about, there is absolutely not unanimous agreement across this Senate floor. Perhaps not even in a partisan way. There may not be agreement from the Democrat members of the Senate, and there may not be agreement from the Republican members of the Senate, and therefore it's impossible for us to agree to allow an amendment that we know has controversy and is not acceptable to 100 senators to get this special privilege of being adopted so easily. The underlying unanimous consent request allows for the amendment that the senator from Maryland is proposing. He has the right to offer the amendment on the floor. That has been agreed to, but that is insufficient for the senator, and he wants to modify his amendment to be more easily, in fact, automatically accepted. This issue, sadly, if the senator from Maryland ultimately objects to the underlying request, if he is not able to have his consent agreement modified to get the amendment in the position he wants, he then has to decide, if he fails in that regard, he has to decide, do I want to object to all the bills, all 4 of them from being considered? And unfortunately, that includes Commerce, Justice, Science, which I and the senator from Maryland have worked on together as the chairman of that committee and as the ranking member or vice chair of that committee. And should he ultimately object to the entire package here because he isn't successful on this request to move his amendment, then all the work that he and I and the members of the subcommittee and the members of the full committee and other senators in their input have put together that passed in a bipartisan way out of the committee, that bill will fall by the wayside. We will then not consider commerce, justice, science tonight, tomorrow, next week, and in my view, the United States Senate will never see commerce, justice, science appropriation bill on the Senate floor. And therefore, our work to fund NASA, to fund the National Science Foundation, to fund our police in our home communities and our sheriffs in our home counties, to support the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, and the U.S. Marshals, and to support the Department of Commerce in its efforts to grow the country's economy, provide broadband to our constituents at home, rural and urban, and to support the efforts of trying to find trade agreements by this administration and the efforts at USTR to find those satisfactory agreements that grow our nation's economy, the work that we've gone through to this point becomes irrelevant. If this was a momentary setback, I'd feel less concerned, less emotional, less connected to the desire of having this bill see consideration on the Senate floor in this package. Our appropriations process, which I have bragged about tonight, our appropriations process is fragile. We have been successful because we've each set aside things that we find objectionable and worked for the common good of the committee and the American people. It has been so long since the United States Senate has done its work in this arena and too many others. All of us, Madam President, all of us in this Senate, we have other things we'd like to do, but we devote our time and effort to public service, presumably to the public good of our constituents at home and the well-being of Americans across the country. And whether we do that well or not has a consequence around the globe. The United States of America is a place that needs to demonstrate to others in our own country, but others around the world, that we still have the capabilities of governing. My view is that I've never served in the United States Senate when it was at its best. What I know about the Senate is what I read as a kid. What I know about the Senate as the way it should be is the way I learned about it in history. And I want to work here where we do our jobs. If we fail here, we don't just fail for the moment. Once again, the appropriations process is set aside. When we return in September, I hope we're able to do more appropriation bills, but I doubt that this is the first one to be considered, and I doubt that the senator from Maryland's amendment goes away, so the problems we have tonight aren't going to disappear. We won't see this, and then we'll immediately turn to the consideration of a continuing resolution that funds the federal government at the same rate, at the same place, the same amount of money as we did this last year. Incidentally, we did. It's not incidental. We had the same problem last year. We didn't get our appropriation bills. Not one of the 12 appropriation bills were considered on this Senate floor, and we did. I shouldn't say we had to do. We did a continuing resolution saying we can't decide this. We can't get our act together well enough as Republicans or Democrats or as however you want to categorize people. We can't work together well enough to pass 12 appropriation bills on the Senate floor if we were ever given the chance. This is an indictment of all of us, and I take it very personally as a member of the Appropriations Committee with responsibilities to do our work. And none of us, to go back to the point I attempted to make earlier and got sidetracked, none of us want to be here if we're not making a difference. We have families. We have home places that we love to be. and we devote our time and effort to something that is a worthy cause, but the worthiness of that cause, if it's just to be here because you have your name on a door, you have perhaps an important sounding title, senator, there is no joy. There's no joy for me, and I can't imagine there's joy for others if the answer, well, we just can't work together well enough to do what the American people insist on, demand, and certainly deserve. This place needs to prove its relevance. And once again, if we see failure tonight, that failure will continue, and we'll demonstrate it one more time. Well, they just couldn't do it. They didn't get it done. Well, they passed 3 out of 12 appropriation bills. And in September, as the government is approaching a shutdown, because we haven't funded these 12 bills, we haven't passed these 12 bills, we're once again on the Senate floor scrambling to figure out how we keep the government open. What message does that send to our constituents that we can't even figure out how to have a budget or a top-line number and appropriate money? Every county commission, every school board, every city council has a budget, and they figure out how to spend money in a year. Why are we less than that? Why is it so difficult for us? I want to work in a Senate that works together. I don't expect us to agree, but there's common good that can be found in so many instances. And we are so close. The Senator from Maryland's amendment is about where the FBI headquarters should be located and the process by which that decision should be determined. I appreciate the senator's interest, but this is not even in the jurisdiction of the subcommittee I chair. This is before us tonight because one of the senators from Maryland's successors put money into the Commerce, Justice, Science bill for the purposes of building an FBI headquarters, perhaps in her home state of Maryland. We have dealt with this issue. Let me say it this way. This issue has appeared before us before. The jurisdiction is in a different subcommittee of appropriations. And the jurisdiction in the administration rests with the General Services Administration, the GSA, not funded by Commerce, Justice, Science, or any of the other bills we're considering. The senator did offer an amendment in committee, and it ultimately failed. And one of the things I know about the Senate is it takes a majority at a minimum to pass a piece of legislation, and the senator from Maryland does not have a majority, in my view, who will vote for his amendment. He can work to make that happen. The senator from Maryland can lobby and encourage and educate senators on the Senate floor and in their offices from now to the time that this bill passes. If he ultimately objects because he doesn't have a modification to where he fits in the adoption of what we're talking about, then none of the things in the bill become law, and he's lost his opportunity to make the case to 99 of his colleagues about whether he's right or not. The senator and I have worked to find a conclusion that would be satisfactory, and I've been unable to. We've been unable to. I don't know exactly what my reputation is in this place, but I do think that people think I work hard and work hard together. And that's been the case in this circumstance. But as I've assured the senator from Maryland, I know no path forward with his amendment that allows this bill to pass the United States Senate. So when he decides whether or not he's going to object to the underlying question, the question is to the senator from Maryland is, the things that we worked on together, do they matter more than the amendment that you want in such a way that you're unwilling to offer the amendment on the Senate floor and let the Senate work its will. I think I'm about ready to conclude my remarks, but it reminds me that so many times by our colleagues who are not on the Appropriations Committee, I think we get criticized for being insular. That's not true. We take input from every senator. 99 of the senators in this body provided information to the Appropriations Committee to tell us how to do our work. But there's this sense that we do our own thing. I've always said the reason we have the Senate is to bring the bills to the floor so everybody, those who are not on the Appropriations Committee, have the chance to have their input. I can't turn what was a majority vote against the senator from Maryland's amendment into something that a majority of my colleagues would support, but we are willing. The majority leader has indicated to the senator from Maryland he can have a vote to see if he can do it. While I've tried and failed to find 51 votes for the senator's amendment, I'm quite certain he's more skilled than I am. I'm quite certain that he is passionate enough about this issue. Let him find the folks who would support his amendment, and he can do so. It's been given to him that opportunity, and all he has to do is find 50 senators to join him to say it. I don't think it's easy, but I think that effort on his part is a better outcome. Whatever the outcome of that amendment is, it's a better outcome than this legislation, Commerce, Justice, Science, the Agriculture Department, the legislative branch, and Military and Veterans Affairs. It's more important for us to demonstrate that we actually can legislate and appropriate. And here we are, starting on our first effort in 2025, and we're already hung up on something that is not really our business. I started to say earlier, this issue has been around a long time. It's always been resolved by somebody way above me as a chairman. Sometimes it's gone higher than, certainly, I don't mean certainly, higher, there's not much higher than the chairman and the vice chairman of the committee. But even they have struggled in the past to find a resolution to this issue about where the FBI headquarters should be. And it's gone to the other leaders, the 2 House leaders and the 2 Senate leaders, to see if they can find a conclusion. I can't solve the problem even if I wanted to. Shouldn't say it that way. I can't solve the problem as I want to solve a problem for the senator from Maryland. Perhaps somebody else can in this process, but don't let the work product that the senator from Maryland and I, members of the committee, and this Senate have worked so hard to find common ground. And we were successful and get complimented for the work we did in accomplishing this goal. Mr. President, I will not modify my request.
Objection to the modification is heard.
Is there an objection to the original request?
Is there an objection to the original request?
Mr. President,
Senator from Maryland.
reserving the right to object. And I just do want to take a few moments to respond to the senator from Kansas. First of all, I do think it is the business of the subcommittee that oversees the Department of Justice and the FBI to ensure that the men and the women of the FBI have a headquarters, wherever it is, that meets the security standards that they have set out for themselves for their own protection. I also agree with the senator for Kansas that we should and do work together on a bipartisan basis on the Appropriations Committee. And we should do that as a separate branch of government than the executive branch. The only reason we are here is because the President of the United States decided to seize funds that had been set aside by this committee on a bipartisan basis and others and use them for another purpose. This is a moment actually where if the Senate was adhering to its traditions of bipartisanship, it would stand up together against the President of the United States. But that's not what we're witnessing on so many of these appropriation bills. What happened in this case was the President of the United States interfered with the process. I did offer an amendment in the Senate Appropriations Committee. It was actually adopted on a majority basis. It was an amendment not only to ensure that the FBI would go to a level 5 security facility, it was an amendment that said it should go to the one that was selected after a long process. After that was adopted on a bipartisan basis, our Republican colleagues on the committee said that all the work that we've done on the bill, all the work the Senator of Kansas is talking about, when it comes to NSF, when it comes to NASA, when it comes to NOAA, we're not going to let all of that good work go forward if that amendment to ensure the security of the FBI facility at the selected site was attached. I've never seen anything like it in Congress, and even before I got here, I too was a student of Congress and loved the process. What happened was after that amendment got on in the Appropriations Committee on a bipartisan basis, our Republican colleagues said, we don't want that so badly that we're now going to undo that entire process. That's not bipartisanship. And we know why that happened too. It didn't happen because members of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Republicans and Democrats, didn't think that was the right thing to do to preserve what we had set out before and make sure that the men and women have a level 5 security headquarters. We did it because the President of the United States was going to throw a fit if that provision stayed on. That's why people reversed the position. So I say to my friend from Kansas, we should do our work on a bipartisan basis. And we shouldn't make our decisions out of fear about what somebody in the White House is going to do, because that distorts the entire process here in the United States Senate. And so I believe that if we set this aside for now, we will, I hope, be able to get it back on track in September. And I hope we will return to what has been that bipartisan tradition and not allow the executive to come in, undo work that had been done on a bipartisan basis. This is not about picking the location in this amendment. This is simply about making sure that the men and women of the FBI have a building that is secure. And I will just end with this. The last time the Trump administration was in the White House, they also played with this whole issue. They said they wanted to construct a new headquarters on the site of the current FBI building, the Hoover building. And then they submitted to Congress a 25-page prospectus that they said would meet the security requirements of the men and women of the FBI. Guess what? The Inspector General of the Department of Justice and the Inspector General of GSA said that the work they'd shown did not meet those security requirements. Did not meet those security requirements. We should make sure wherever they go, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, wherever they go, that congressional directive, that FBI directive, for the purposes that I set out at the beginning because of the kind of the work the FBI do, we need to honor that. That's what this amendment does. That's what it did when it was first adopted by the Senate Appropriations Committee on a bipartisan basis, before everybody ran the other way because we were going to make the White House mad. So, Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, it is so disheartening that the senator